What I wanted to do with this show was exemplify how I'm beginning to create a world or a universe. So it's called Queer Cosmology, the making of the universe, or making of a universe, um, because that's kind of the main point of my practice is to take all the components of it and then see how it all fits together to create a world and make it as believable as I can make it. So I pay attention to details and complexity as a way to kind of suspend your disbelief to make it as believable as possible. So all the components in the show wrap around to the world that I'm building. I have the drawings, which represent the physics and the underlayer network of the world, and it's kind of like sci-fi physics. And then the paintings are the meat of the world, so they are the actual physical going-ons of what's happening. And then the VR is like the environment, ecology, and all around space of the world I'm building. And then down the hall, I have sketches, which is kind of like the storyline of what is going on in the world. Um, and it's queer, I think, because I'm part of making a world for me is entertaining this idea of building a utopia, or my version of utopia. So I want to paint and give the sense that there's this freedom and agency and excitement. And it's alien in a sense that it can represent that kind of freedom that might not otherwise be felt in your day-to-day reality. And I think utopians are so important right now because I guess we have so many examples of dystopian societies, and we're always focused on the negative as opposed to another story of what could be. So if we're always in the same story, we'll never have anything that we can walk into. And so part of making utopia, or my queer cosmology, my queer world, is creating this alternate story, this better alternative where we can go towards and what we can work towards. The drawings are the physics of my universe. They're like the web and framework that exist underlying all of the physical aspects of the universe. So it's like all the invisible parts of it, the networks that exist on both micro and macro scale. And it's kind of based off of the etymology of the word queer, so to twerk, to twist, to bend, to pervert even. And it's that idea that this world, its physical framework, has the structure of endlessly diverting itself and complexifying itself and diversifying itself in its most natural state. And so to me, that's natural in the world already. But that's kind of like the baseline of the world that I'm building on top of. Another aspect of it is I'm really interested in kind of the scale of things. That's why I started drawing to begin with. I was interested in part to whole relationships. I like to imagine that I'm like one little dot and I can't see the utter complexity of the world around me or the drawing around me. But creating that drawing with all the components and web-like structure allows me to step outside of that dot's viewpoint and see the utter complexity and beauty for what it is. And it's kind of like a reminder, like everyone has a life and complexity to that life that's as vivid and unique as my own. That was like the basis of the drawing. And then the queer etymology kind of just made so much sense to lay on top of that. Another thing with the drawings that I'm interested in, and I read Queer Phenomenology by Sarah Ahmed, and she talks about how in society there's like various lines and you're all in a line. And so when you're in a line, you can only see the head that's in front of you. You can't see where you're going necessarily unless you step outside of the line. And queerness helps you to step outside of the line, if not forces you outside of the line, so you can see it for what it is. And so we always need those viewpoints for any type of, there's so many different lines in society, but having the viewpoints of those that diverge from us, I think is so vital to our evolution and understanding of who we are. I think for the large drawings, it's very much thinking of the scale of things. Like that's its main purpose, is to help me step outside of myself and view life in the complexity, and also understand that that's kind of the universe. Another thing that I really like about drawing large is it's only graphite and paper, so you can have the most humble materials and make the most complex thing with it, and that's really exciting. You can have nothing and create everything, and within that everything is still the beginning of the nothing. Working small, I feel like I get more vulnerable and intimate. I can get more figurative, and I can get more. It's almost like a diary. You can say more on the smaller scale for myself. I think it will translate to the larger scale eventually, but right now the small scale helps me to be a little bit more vulnerable, more narrative based, and it's kind of like the underlying framework of what an actual painting might be, where the drawing is just going to be the drawing as it is. When I work small, I imagine that it will be a painting. Sometimes it is just its own thing. I guess it depends on the scale. Like if it's this size, it's still big enough. If it's that size, it's small. This show has, and I think the show is going to be unique because it might be one of the only times where I have the old series that's bleeding into my new series. And you can't, like, I can tell the difference. The new series is more figurative and more narrative based, and the old series kind of focuses on the importance of abstracting a figure, as well as having like a single deity, a single figure that's going to be abstracted. The old series, I was looking at, and it bleeds into I still have aspects into my new series of this, but I was looking at kind of queer and trans peoples and deities within history, specifically within Christian mythology and associated folklore, as a kind of being like, they've used Christianity as their own agenda and just kind of like written out or talked about all these other aspects. So it's fun to go into that same framework and kind of fuck it up a little bit and then be like, I can do the same thing. Here are my gods, here's my mythology. I'm almost pulling from the same history and the same cultures as you guys. I'm just noticing that there's other aspects that you've neglected to include for various reasons. So I'm able to take those trans deities and look at their stories and kind of give them their power back. So for example, I have the Green Man, and the Green Man is also known as the devil. The devil is like a conglomeration of the Green Man, Pan, and this deity Ba. And so I have the hooves of the Green Man, and I have the horns from Ba, and all of those things kind of go into our modern version of the devil. The image of the devil doesn't come from the Bible or anything outside of us taking from all these other, appropriating from all these other gods. And queer people and being demonized constantly, and having that constantly, like we're always the villain in every single story. So I was able to take the devil, turn him into the Green Man, and the Green Man he's a myth that's all about regeneration and forestry and wildness. His face is usually surrounded with foliage, and if you go to look at old churches, you'll sometimes see his carving, his face, as part of like the old folklore of the area. So part of that like wildness and nature they tried to demonize, and so to bring back the original story, and I have the scribe behind the devil to be like, we're rewriting our story, is like an example of how I take these deities and however their story has been twisted, I can either right that wrong or find a place of power within it. And then I also have some symbols in there. I have Aleph and Tav to represent the beginning and the end. Like they began with their stories and their agency, and no matter what we say and do, they'll end with their agency and their stories. And I think the same is for queerness. Like we began with who we are, and we will always have that and end with it, regardless of what is told around us. VR is really nice because it is the chance for me to not exist in my body. And I think part of queerness is you grow up with this dysphoria. Even if it's a question mark, you still have this thing that you're grappling with and you don't know why you're grappling with this thing, this amorphous thing. But when you put on the headset, you just exist all in your mind. So it's like the ultimate form of freedom. And so it's very enjoyable for that aspect of it. And it also just like structurally helps me space out how things would look. And so it's made my paintings a lot better. And I'm going to hopefully paint versions of the VR worlds that I've made in a future series. Or not a future series, the continuation of the series. And And it helped me map out my world too, because I could physically see it in space. I could physically go on the boat. I could physically be on the island with the tree of life. I could like go through the tree and see Gaia and bringing that experience, and it just made it so much more real. So everything that exists in my head now exists in real life, and through painting and drawing and installation and like showing work will help me solidify that realness and make it all the more believable, which will help people feel it all the more and then go on about your day to day. Part of the fun and joy of abstraction is I create this kind of like magic eye experience where you won't know that the figure is there immediately, but when you find it, then you're like, oh, there's something more here, and there's figures in the other paintings. And so it's kind of that idea of you actually have to spend time with someone and connect with someone to actually know that person. And that's also queerness. A lot of queerness is kind of invisible. Unless you spend time with someone or know someone, then you can know who they are. You can know their gender, just about their lives, etc. And so that is kind of a really powerful thing that I don't think people would realize is powerful, because it kind of sucks people in who might not otherwise be interested in those types of stories. And then the stories themselves, if they go that way, will also further, because we all share the same mythologies within us. We all share the same things that kind of like archetypes. It's like a very shared human experience. And so you kind of have this hook after hook after hook. But as far as people knowing the actual story, I kind of like view it as music in a different language. You can enter it in different levels. You can enjoy it and still feel it. And I think that will still have absolutely has an effect. It makes you a more fluid, open person just by experiencing that and seeing the difference and understanding differentness. Or you could look up the synopsis. You could learn the language. Like you can enter the music from so many different points. And all of the points, I think, are equally valid. And I do have stories attached to all my paintings that I want to make easily accessible and available. I think it'll be more important with my newer paintings, but the painting will still always like be a standalone painting. And so the new series is kind of delving more into the actual making and going on of the world rather than a physical deity just as a standalone. And part of that is just creating my own mythology, my own doctrine, and my own myth. It allows me to have more freedom, but I'm still pulling from the myths that have been indoctrinated us or have been given to us to begin with. So I'm still looking at the same mythology. I'm looking at Christian mythology, Jewish myth, and associated folklore. I'm also kind of delving into conspiracy theories because I'm interested in how much grip conspiracy theories have on the way people act. And you can't really tell in the painting directly, but if you learn more about it and you read about it, it's going to be all in there. So I have my main character, Adam, and he kind of goes to this parallel Earth, which is Earth 38.2. And it's 38.2 because 38 degrees Celsius is like a fever point. So you get to this world by having a kind of feverish moment in your life. And then once he makes it to this world, he meets his double self, Plank, which is the paintings over there. And eventually they make it to the river person, who is the painting over there. So he's going on this entire journey to eventually make it to Inner Earth, which is where the series will continue on. So part of Earth 38.2 is it's a parallel universe, parallel to ours, and it's taking place at the same time, but it represents Earth's ancient past. And it represents a time before the moon, because again, like moon conspiracy theory. And so the moon kind of acts as like a chaos orb. So this is the utopia before the chaos orb that was planted there. And so that's where he kind of gets teleported to. And he's like, because he's not from that universe, he's kind of going to be like this tainted thing that kind of taints the universe, but it'll eventually be in a positive way. And so the VR is a continuation of that world. I have a boat with a river, because they'll eventually be on the river. I have a tree with all the people around the tree, and then through the tree they'll meet Gaia, who is Gaia in my world because it's a gay world, and everything is birthed through her and from her. So essentially also being gay. So you have the gay framework of the drawings, and then you have this world where Gaia, everything's birthed through her and from her, is another point of like every single aspect of this world is queer. There's nothing outside of that. So it's, when it's so much the norm, it's almost, it would be queer to not be queer. And that's another exciting point of imagining what that world would be like. And it's also interesting because as I'm making this world, I'm going back into the world that we live in and being like, it's kind of like this way, we just don't see it this way. Like everything is a little queer, we just don't see it this way. Everything's a little bit connected, we just don't see it that way. Everything is more magical and more free, but we refuse to live that way because of the ideologies that have been forced upon us. And so in creating Utopia, I can be like, give that feeling of what that freedom is and that agency is, so that when you go back to the world and you don't feel that, everything that is not that freedom becomes so unbearably not okay that you refuse to do it. Or I think creating these utopias have so much potential to act and have real change in the world than people might realize. Like the stories we tell dictate everything. They control everything. Everything we live is a story. And the worst people have been telling the stories. And so now we have to start telling the stories so that we have something else to walk in towards. And I think having a queer story, a queer world, seeing the world in that lens would be great for everyone and more fun.